We're back. Yes, we are live on the air with Jared and Rebecca. Of course, Jared Moffat and Rebecca Nieves-McGoldrick live from Mexico. Folks, if you hadn't met them while they lived here in Rhode Island, you missed something special. Jared and Rebecca became rock stars, if you will, within, I'll call it the community organizing environment, addressing everything from family needs, families in prison, the regulation and legalization of cannabis, as well as just being really just fundamentally really nice people. A lot of fun. They brought professionalism into an environment in the State House which is sorely lacking. They decided, and we're going to talk a little bit about this in a second, they've decided to move, at least for the time being, to Mexico and to explore Central and Latin America. They're going to touch base with us from time to time. Let us know how they're doing. Give us some observations on cultural issues in Central and Latin America, and at the same time, perhaps reflect a little bit on the perception of American mores, American foreign policy, American cultural issues as to how they impact Central and Latin America. Both were frequent repeat offenders on the coalition, both in our radio days and now in our Go Local Live days. Guys, it's great to see you again. Welcome to the coalition. First of all, obviously, when we heard what was going on in Mexico, we were worried about you guys. How did you guys make out during this earthquake? Give us a little bit about the geography and where you are, and just let us know how you're doing.
Great. Yeah. Well, it's good to see you, Pat, and thanks for that introduction. It's great to be talking with you. Yeah, so, we are in a part of the city that where we are immediately wasn't directly impacted. There, our building is fine and our street is fine, but several neighborhoods very close to us were among the hardest hit, particularly the neighborhoods.
Roma. There were over 20 buildings within the city that collapsed, and now engineers are evaluating the infrastructure of the buildings that are remaining that did not collapse during the initial earthquake, but have evaluated and said that an estimated 3,000 buildings are at risk of collapse. Right. So that's definitely something that some people cannot return to buildings even if they didn't fully collapse, just because of the structural integrity of them. And also, if there are aftershocks or future earthquakes, these buildings stand to be at the most risk of collapse. So it's definitely a scale catastrophe that we hadn't personally been through. We've witnessed the aftermath of other events like this. We were in Haiti after the Haiti earthquake, but we weren't there during the earthquake. So just seeing the immediate response of people and how they've come together to support each other, but from volunteers working around the clock through the night, through the rain, to make sure they rescue people from the rubble, to people coming together, cooking meals for each other, offering their homes for people who have been displaced, providing veterinary care and medical care to people, and they've really been remarkable.
Right. Now, the tough part in our culture is, by and large, notwithstanding the tragedies in Houston and certain parts of Florida, by and large, we're not confronted with this type of mass casualties and mass property loss throughout our history. And as a result of the unrelenting news cycle, as a result of the constant demands on people, both in time and money, to support a variety of charities, I hesitate to say this, but to a certain degree, we've become, as Americans, rather immune at times to the sheer level of tragedy that takes place in developing nations when something like this hits. America is blessed in countless ways, but one of them is, quite frankly, the advanced engineering that's taken place in countries in a developed nation that is sometimes difficult to replicate, particularly in poor areas of Central and Latin America. So you've got this exponential impact, if you will, from a natural disaster like this. Mexico, too, as a country, we're well acquainted with some of the challenges facing it, but Mexico City, in so many areas, in Mexico were really, over the last few years, really establishing themselves as a major player in world trade, with an ingenuity and a dignity that I'm not sure if Americans we give Mexico full credit for, particularly under this administration. Be that as it may, what impact has this had on the business and day-to-day economic life of folks in the Mexican capital?
Well, I would just first say, yeah, I mean, I think that that's a really important thing to point out is that Mexico City is a global cosmopolitan city. I mean, it is I believe it's the largest city in the Western Hemisphere. It's certainly comparable to New York and I think a little bigger than New York City. And, there's a lot going on here. That said, there has been obviously a lot of economic fallout from the earthquake, particularly in the areas that we mentioned.
Well, yeah, I think that, that a couple of important things to make note of is a third of Mexico's economy is based in Mexico City. So now that the city has been declared a federal disaster zone, that has meant two things. One, it means a release of funding from the federal government to begin distributing money to people who have been impacted. But two, it means that a lot of events and business areas are totally shut down. We walked around today to bring some more medical supplies to the medical clinics that have been established to help people. And the neighborhood that is, right around the corner from us, Condesa, is one of, we just saw entire blocks just shut down. So businesses are completely shut down. That's a big commercial zone. So the economic impact that it's going to have within Mexico City is going to ripple throughout the country because of the tax base and the economy here. The other thing is that a few weeks ago, this was the second major earthquake to hit Mexico within 2 weeks. So in the beginning of September, a 8.1 earthquake hit Oaxaca and Chiapas. 45,000 homes have collapsed. And that has been a huge toll. And those are two of the poorest states in Mexico. Mm-hmm. So Mexico City is in a unique position. Both it has a larger economic base here than something like Oaxaca or Chiapas, which rely heavily on the tourism industry. And since the earthquake happened, a lot of people have canceled their trips to those areas. And these regions really rely on people in the tourism industry. So, a week without people coming through can mean the difference between people making ends meet. We're actually going to be in Oaxaca a week from tomorrow. We'll be going to Oaxaca. So we plan on continuing going through with that. But it'll be, so in some ways they were hit differently. But both will have very long-lasting economic consequences for the more rural places like Oaxaca and Chiapas, more indigenous areas as well, and also the city of Mexico City.
Because of natural disasters, you've seen really an unparalleled 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 punch across the Caribbean, Central and Latin America that I haven't seen, I don't think any of us have seen in our lifetime. The impact economically, and as a result then spiritually and socially on these nations, who many of whom, quite honestly, lived on the verge anyway. What can we as Americans do beyond just sending a few bucks? Since this crisis has brought us to a different space in the conversation than I think we envisioned when we spoke at Waterplace Park just a few weeks ago when you were about to leave Rhode Island. Not only is it important to recognize the natural disaster and the impacts, so that's critically important, but this clearly raises up a question of the nature and the type and the going forward relationship we have as a culture, as an economy, as a people with this part of the world. Is there a look towards America to help? Is there, these countries are much more independent than we ever give them credit for on a number of different levels. But what do you think America's role should be in this and on all these issues?
Absolutely. I mean, I think particularly in the case of Puerto Rico, but this has, this is more widespread throughout the Caribbean and Latin America in general, is looking at not just as Americans, I think we have a tendency to give aid in the immediate aftermath, but we don't look at the infrastructural and the colonial underdevelopment that has led to these places being particularly vulnerable to such damage. So, people now are eager to donate to Puerto Rico, but the reason that the island is suffering on such a catastrophic level is because of a lot of foreign policy, domestic policies that the U.S. has had towards Puerto Rico, with debt forgiveness, the island filed bankruptcy, the brain drain of economic underdevelopment that has led to so many really important people, medics, engineers, business people leaving for the mainland, that has left Puerto Rico with really young people, really old people, and no one in the middle who's really able to provide that infrastructure that the island needs. And we see the same thing happening in Mexico. Something that we're really interested, I've been really interested in interrogating, is in the U.S. we talk about immigration policy from what we need to be doing to people who are already undocumented in the country, but we never really reflect on the driving forces of what is driving mass migration. And a lot of it is our foreign economic policy, the drug war that we have exported to this part of the world. So people here it is not an easy decision to make, to cross a border, to cross deserts, to cross oceans.
Right.
If that's what you have to do for a better life, you have to ask what circumstances led to life in that country being so difficult to bear. There are entire states in Mexico that you'll go into a classroom and ask how many people have a parent who is living in the U.S. and every single child in the classroom raises their hand. So you have grandparents raising children, and every able-bodied person in that town is in the U.S. working for slave wages. So this is leading to a cycle of poverty, a cycle of underdevelopment in these places. And then when a natural disaster hits, it doesn't have the infrastructure. It didn't have the infrastructure to sustain such a natural disaster or to rebuild.
Yeah, I'll call it a cycle of economic violence because it is violent and is economically motivated. Jared, how many times over the past 3 or 4 years that we've known each other did we talk about narco-terrorism as a stimulating agent, a precipitant factor behind mass migration to the United States, which we even talked about what resulted in a brain drain, a capital flight, a grotesque level of, I'll call it, unattractiveness for foreign capital to invest. For lack of a better cliche, the chickens have really come home to roost now, haven't they?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, there is obviously a lot of violence that's caused by the drug war. I think that, that's another thing that I hope to sort of shift as I live here and spend time here, is that, I also want to let people know there's a lot more to Mexico than just the drug war and the violence. That's a huge problem. There's obviously a lot of corruption there. And I think it's a direct result of U.S. policies. But I just want to say, sort of as a caveat, that I want folks to know that there's a lot more going on here than just that. And I think that perception is sort of really all that the U.S. media sort of lets through into the U.S. or psyche. But that said, you're absolutely right. I mean, I think it's very important for people to understand that, a lot of the refugees who are, coming to the United States from Central America and Mexico are fleeing violence that the U.S. has essentially exported, as Rebecca said. I mean, one way to put it is that the United States has, on the one hand, sort of an insatiable appetite for drugs, but also an unwillingness to create a legal system for those drugs. And those two things combined are what lead to the massive production of illegal drugs and the trafficking that comes along with that in Latin America. So, most drug use is happening in the Western Hemisphere in the United States. I mean, we consume more illegal drugs than any other country, certainly in our hemisphere. And at the same time, we refuse to create systems to regulate those drugs and create them in a safe way. Mm-hmm. So what happens is that we necessarily force the production of those drugs underground, which creates violence, and then we, in an attempt to solve that problem, end up trying to fight that war in other people's backyards and in Latin America's backyards. And we've seen this, of course, through the 80s and 90s in Colombia, but now primarily a lot of violence is happening in Central America and Mexico. Right. And yeah, I don't think there's a lot of willingness on the part of United States citizens to take responsibility for the fact that when we have child refugees at our border, we don't sit back and ask, why are they there? What are they fleeing? As Rebecca said, we have to reflect on what causes someone to want to uproot their lives and make a dangerous, very dangerous, and oftentimes lethal journey to get to the United States. We have to think, well, there must be something causing that, and we play a very, very instrumental role and causal role in why people are leaving. So, that's really important for people to understand.
And how would one rational being expect rational economic development to take place in some of the outlaw states, as you so aptly point out, that do not, I'll say, dominate the mind space of Americans as opposed to actually dominating the land space of Mexico? But how can one attract, reasonable economic development if in fact you're operating within this milieu? I mean, you can't. What company is going to look to export jobs or create opportunities for Mexicans or indigenous people in an environment that is so rife with violence, when in fact the violence is economically motivated? We expect, you're absolutely right. We effectively as a nation export one of our largest social ills and one of our largest social crises to the people of Mexico. We, at the same time, while some portions of our society, I'll emphasize some, object outrageously to what they perceive as the importation of some economic issues back to us. If we were to try and model like so many states do, are we a net giver or a receiver of funds? It is my heartfelt belief that we, quite frankly, export more issues to Mexico than anything an immigration issue can import back into the United States. It is the actions and the failure of the moral responsibility of the American government to, in a sense, clean their own house that has precipitated a crisis which is now grotesquely exacerbated by a natural disaster. Yikes.
Right. Well, and I think a key point here is that, to think about all the ripple effects that happens from this is, one thing is that, part of the vicious cycle is if you're a young person growing up in some of these impoverished areas, particularly in Mexico and other Central American countries, one of the only sort of rational ways out is to participate in the illegal drug trade. That is one industry that you can, make an income from. But of course, that trade and that industry not only creates, violence in terms of turf wars and things like that, and skirmishes with, anti-forces, but it also breeds a lot of corruption, political corruption within the system. And so, like you said, that also turns away business investment because, businesses don't want to operate in a system that doesn't have legitimacy and doesn't have a sort of a promise of stability. And so it creates this vicious cycle where there's a lack of investment because of that political corruption. And that leads to more people then, having no other option but to participate in the illicit drug trade. And again, these are products of not just the drug war, but I think largely trade policies as well that the United States has created. So, we again, as United States citizens, really need to think deeply about the plight of our neighbors and the people that we share, share borders with, but also share so much else with, share cultures and share people with. And I just don't think there's enough reflection on the part of United States citizens and certainly in the media about those dynamics. And it would benefit everyone if we had more conversations like that.
Right, exactly. So we need, as Americans, to use what's happening right now as we speak in darkened cities around both the outer areas of Mexico and in Mexico City. We need to use that to spark that kind of conversation now, because quite frankly, it's not going to fix itself. It's not going to heal itself at any level. I want to talk, though, somewhat positively, because I think when we talked about doing this, we were going to start off on a happier note, which was the sense of wonderment and adventure that the two of you share in leaving Rhode Island to literally to see the world. You left Rhode Island, you moved to Mexico. Tell us about some of the adventures you have planned and what you're hoping to accomplish and see and embrace and enjoy, and let's have some fun for a minute or two.
Yeah, well, I think one of the big motivators, both having a foot in the U.S. and a foot in Latin America, mm-hmm. is also to dispel some of like what Jared had talked about is, when we initially told some people we're moving to Mexico, the reaction was fear from a lot of people.
Right.
Oh my gosh, is it safe? Is it okay? And I think that part of this journey is humanizing the Latin American narrative and complicating it mm-hmm. for folks in the U.S. Right now, I think that's it's always been critical, but especially under this administration and some of the policies that we're seeing rolled out around immigration and Latinos, that it's really important to kind of show that Latinos are not we're not narrow. Single-faceted group of people.
Right.
We're dynamic. We contribute, and I say this as I'm using we. My mom is Mexican, and we contribute a lot to the United States, and also to show how beautiful our countries are, how beautiful our cultures are, and our people. Mm-hmm. I also think that part of this has been, our frustration with the political system in the United States and in Rhode Island. We see ourselves as learners here. Latin America has a long history of confronting fascism, confronting corruption, and obviously it is still in the trenches dealing with that. But this is kind of like an incubator of knowledge for us, as organizers, to learn from other people about tactics that they've utilized, mm-hmm. About developing alternative systems. Something that the two of us, I think, are really interested in is people-powered alternatives to mm-hmm. Failed systems. And we're seeing that happen right now with the response to the earthquake. Mm-hmm. It is not the police, or the military, or the government who is coming in and saving people. Mm-hmm. It is easy to see the self-organization of people coming together and mm-hmm. very quickly and very precisely dealing with this crisis. Mm-hmm. Distributing supplies, sending out medics to where they are needed, construction workers bringing in supplies to move rubble. It's organized. It's amazing to see. Right. So we're here to learn, and I think that's what we really want to do with this. Is the U.S. has a mind that we are always doing it best, and we kind of want to say, maybe there's a lot we can learn from other places.
Right, and that's what we hope you'll share with us in sort of a sense of real time as we get together from time to time, and both humanize, both illustrate, demonstrate, analyze, bring a legitimate focus to a lot of these issues. We're hoping that over time you'll bring people on the air with you who want to address issues as both old, traditional, and also as they arise. In recorded history, I don't know if you can point to a time where events are so fluid, so dynamic, and you've got this massive shift of people and populations and political systems taking place almost on a daily basis. And you're right there on the front lines to record it and to learn from it and to share. I'm convinced that the two of you are the type of people, wherever you go, events will follow. You will always be in the center of things. It just seems to be, well, it just seems to be how it's going to work out for you guys. You know,
Well, what did your mom say? Rebecca's mom messaged us and earlier today and said, look at these two movers and shakers. They moved to Mexico, and then the city started shaking. So what they'll do next.
Things seem to follow. So
now I've got to ask. Neither of you are native Rhode Islanders, nor am I. But something happens. I think it's at a DNA level once you've lived in Rhode Island for any time. Folks, if you're just joining us, we've got Rebecca and Jared, both of whom, by the way, are graduates of Brown University. Both blazed quite a trail in terms of their community activism on a number of different issues. Also, both really nice people. And it was interesting because the type of the wide range of friends that you got to know while you were here living in state was astonishing, because it was a coalition of everybody. You helped foster an environment where people could disagree politically and at the same time have civil discourse and still just be friends, as opposed to the bitterness and the rancor that seems to be everywhere. And I think actually that's one of the most lasting legacies that you're going to leave behind, Rhode Island. Hopefully you'll come back. But how close now? The events of this week, notwithstanding, are you still drawn to Rhode Island like so many of us are? Are you paying attention to what's going on?
A little bit. I mean, we're definitely still getting some news, but we're also a little unplugged and trying to pay more attention to what's going on here. But
right.
We'll never not be sort of connected to Rhode Island. I think it was, for both of us, it was the longest single place we'd ever lived. Mm-hmm. And we, I think, both grew up and moved from different places, and it's always going to be one of our homes. But yeah, we were certainly grateful for, as you said, the very wide variety of people that we got to know and people that we met, and we're still in touch with a lot of them.
Excellent.
Absolutely. I think that, we will always have one foot in each place. And I think that that's part of one of the biggest strengths being down here, is being able to leverage those connections, especially at a time like this. It's been great to have that support. We went to the store today. Some people had sent, electronically some money down to buy some supplies. When we went to the store, people were just kind of shocked that Americans were sending stuff down because of the political tension between these two countries right now. But also, really, really treated it warmly, and we're so thankful that people are able to have that communication back home, and that those resources are able to be sent in solidarity with the people of Mexico. And obviously the people of Mexico are in solidarity with the people in the U.S. that have been victims of the natural disasters. Mexico has offered relief and work to Texas. So there's that history there, and I think that, we are so intertwined, but especially in a time like this, that connection is stronger than ever.
I couldn't leave you guys tonight without asking the obvious question, the elephant in the room. Rebecca and Jared, getting past the media, and this is the beauty of what you're doing there, because you're living with regular Mexicans, I would imagine, of every political stripe, of every economic background. You're part of a city. Getting past the media hype and the news cycle and the madness, what does the average Mexican think of Donald Trump?
Not highly. Not highly.
Yeah.
It's really one of the things that we've kind of gotten used to is when we go to specifically one public square here, there's all these young students who are doing projects for their English classes in school. So they interview people who are native English speakers, and they ask these questions, and we've kind of gotten used to what kind of questions they ask. But one of the questions is always, what's your nationality, and do you like Mexico? And when they hear that our nationality is American and that we love Mexico, it kind of catches them off guard. They're like, we don't think any Americans like Mexico. And so those are really interesting conversations to have with people down here to say that no, not all of us are behind the president, and that a lot of us are trying to dismantle the regime that he is putting in place. So that's a
Yeah, I would just add, I think what again, we've only been here for 3 weeks, so we can't really speak for for a lot of people, but based on our limited experience, I think that we struggle to understand how so many Americans voted for Donald Trump, right? And I think that's one thing that's hard for people to wrap their minds around. But the other thing, though, is I think that in Mexico, and I think in a lot of countries outside the United States, people understand the difference between a government and a people. And I think Mexicans very keenly feel that here. The government is very unpopular. The president, Peña Nieto, has an approval rating somewhere between 15 and 28%, depending on which polls you're looking at. So there's an understanding that governments don't always represent people. Yeah. And so I think that it's maybe a little unexpected sometimes, but it's also not hard for people to wrap their minds around the fact that the people of the United States have more humanity and are able to have more compassion, and a relationship with Mexico that isn't necessarily reflected in the level of the government. So yeah, he's certainly not a popular guy down here, but I don't think that has really gotten in the way of us making human connections with people.
Well, and what's got to be fascinating too is, your approach, and what I mean by that is, so many of the Americans that I would imagine folks in Mexico meet are first and foremost tourists. You've got, perhaps in the upper middle class or in the moneyed classes, you've got an interaction with the business community that might be visiting there. And then of course you've got a significant presence in different states within Mexico of American retirees. But the two of you represent a completely different dynamic. First of all, you're both young. You're just a few years out of university. You do represent a great representation of what I'll call the American intellectual elite, in the sense that you went to it, you graduates of an Ivy League university. You're well steeped in politics, as opposed to sort of the mindless consumerism that so often Americans are portrayed as. But most importantly, by choosing to live there, you're not visiting. Now you're going to tour different places, but it becomes immediately obvious that you've planted some stakes there. Well, how in a place that the portrayal is, and I think it's a very unfair portrayal, is that everybody's trying to get the hell out of. A lot of Mexicans are here in the United States, and please correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm dealing in a sense on hearsay as well, but a lot of Mexicans are here in the United States for economic reasons and still have a tremendous affinity for their home country. So how do people react to the two of you?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a little unique what we're doing. That people think we're either students or they don't really know how to process us. But yeah, I mean, we did make the intentional decision to live in the different communities that we're going to be in, and so we go to the markets. We try to talk to the normal people that live and work on the streets here, and so
the neighborhood we're in is. There's the hotel district that we walked through one day, which is quite a distance from here, and we remarked to each other like how different this experience would be if we were in, just an American tourist staying in the hotel area, eating at the restaurants that cater to tourists and the tourism industry, right, versus living in the community that we're living in. We're in a really I've totally fallen in love with our little block. It's a multi-generational neighborhood. You see grandparents that are taking kids to the schools that they went to. We go to the markets. We're just living an ordinary life here, figuring out the trash collection system,
the
subway system,
right.
So we're seeing a different side than I think your average typical American tourist is seeing.
Right.
I think people are happy that we're curious about that. You know what I mean? I think that that's an encouraging sign to them that, yeah, there are these U.S. citizens who've come down and they want to really kind of see how we're living, and they want to, learn what we're doing. And I don't know how many people, do that type of thing. Probably not very many, but I think that it's well received.
Well, it's interesting. As a libertarian, I believe in the free exchange of ideas, commerce, and people. Primacy of borders, the primacy of state is not important to me. It's the primacy of people and their relationships and how they interact. So I think one of the opportunities here is for the two of you to show that in fact it can be done, that one not limit themselves to one country, one perspective for their entire life, that there is in fact a big wide world out there that one should embrace, not dismiss out of hand, and not to be so dismissive of. And you guys are testament to that. So obviously I applaud that, and not the least little bit of me is jealous right now, despite the challenges you're facing this week. I hope sometime in the next few years to join you guys down there for a drink, and and hopefully you'll give me the tour of the real Mexico that only someone who lives and becomes part of the fabric can experience, because you'll never see through a tour guide, you'll never see through a quick stop the Mexico that you're seeing. And that's, I applaud your courage and your independence and your spirit in doing this. I think it's just fabulous. So
yeah. Real quick, Pat, I'm originally from Mississippi, and when I moved up to Rhode Island, a lot of my family thought I was moving to a foreign.
You did.
As someone who has been to Mississippi several times as a non-Mississippian, I think it's culture shock going to Mississippi than there is coming down to Latin America in many ways. I'm seeing much more suspect in the South, I think, than here.
I don't doubt it, and probably the food's a whole hell of a lot better too. Well, listen, I want to thank you. I hope we can do this every few weeks or so. If the spirit moves you, if there's something that you want to reach out to Rhode Islanders, you've got lots of avenues to do it. I think everyone would enjoy, and you've got a number of channels that you can write through. But I hope, particularly as we get into a season where I think the foreign affairs and the relationship between the two countries is unfortunately going to only become more challenged as we, as a world, dig out of this terrible situation we're facing suddenly because of these rampant natural disasters. For all of these issues, I really look forward to spending time with you guys and sharing it with the audience and sharing it with Rhode Island, and just it's just a real opportunity for the two of you to help in some small way fulfill, I think, what is your mission, which is simultaneously to live, embrace, to humanize, and to accurately portray a part of the world that is so close to us, yet at the same time so very, very foreign. So I hope you'll ride along with us and give us kind of a backseat, if you will, from time to time for your journey.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Folks,
thanks for having.
No, absolutely. And again, send me some messages. If there's organizations down there, particularly on a hyper-local level, that deserve your attention and deserve our attention, please let us know. If there's, moving forward, as you move past this period, hopefully, we're going to move through this of all these natural disasters. If there's organizations, whether it be art, culture, music, politics, individuals that you think that represent an opportunity for us not to gawk, but actually to learn from, then please share them with us, because there's a lot of people that you know and that you haven't met yet that are hungry for this type of exposure, this type of, and your firsthand boots on the ground reporting of it give us a perspective that we'll never see through the media. So again, thank you so much.
No problem.
No problem. Thank you so much for having us.
Yep.
Folks, you are in fact listening to the Coalition. The Coalition Talk Radio, broadcasting on the worldwide Coalition Media Network. We can actually say, Tony, for the first time, that we are actually legitimately worldwide right now. Broadcasting live at the local live broadcasting center in the heart of the city we love, Providence, Rhode Island. The Naked City, the city of 1,000 stories. We're telling a few more of them tonight from people who are far, who are from Rhode Island, but at the same time giving back to us in ways that we never could have anticipated when we first met them. Facebook.com/The Coalition Radio, on the mighty Twitter at Coalition_radio. Of course, coalitionradio.us, where you will find links to our YouTube page, which hosts in perpetuity these videos, so that you can back and admire our guests and find interesting things, and at the same time poke all sorts of fun at me. It's all